Chapter 1721. Knowles looked at his phone and couldn't help but chuckle. Edison raised his head and saw Knowles smiling at his phone. He could more or less guess what Knowles was smiling at as he asked, "Is it Miss Daisy?" Of course it's her. After all, she was the only one who had the guts to spam him with text messages. Someone knocked on the door, and Knowles placed down his phone. "Come in." The secretary pushed the door open and came inside. He handed a blue invitation letter to him with both hands and said, "Young Mr. Knowles, this is an invitation letter from the royal family." Knowles looked at the invitation letter with the emblem of the royal family. He took it over, and it was an invitation to a banquet at the palace. After Freya and Daisy went separate ways in the afternoon, Freya returned to her dormitory. When she arrived at her dormitory, someone called her, and she froze. After a short while, she turned around to look at her father and said expressionlessly, "Yeah? How can I help you?" Brandon pulled a blue invitation card out of his bag and said, "This is an invitation card from the royal family. He's also your grandfather. Since your mother can't go anymore, so." Freya grabbed the strap of her backpack tightly and took a deep breath. "I'm not going. Faye. My mother has never introduced me to the royal family before. Now that Ken is dead, you want me to attend the banquet? That person has never seen me before, so do you think it's appropriate for me to go?" Many nobles, politicians, and wealthy people from all over the world would attend a grand occasion like this one. However, she did not have any intention of getting any connection with the royal family, even though her mother was the daughter of His Majesty, the King. She could see things clearer than her mother did. Her mother was the illegitimate daughter of the King. She wanted to fight for power, so she had her own motives whenever she brought Ken to the royal banquet. To put it bluntly, she wanted to show her father, who held a prominent position, how excellent Ken was. Her mother hated it the most when other people said she was the King's illegitimate daughter. However, the truth was that she couldn't recognize her own place and had no self-awareness. When Knowles was born, the King immediately acknowledged him as his grandson. However, he had not said anything despite Ken being born earlier than Knowles. The King had already made himself very clear. It was just that her mother refused to accept the truth. Brandon looked at her and said, "Faye, I just don't want you to lead a hard life. You're a good kid. I'm sure your grandfather will accept you." She chuckled. "Even my closest family members weren't there for me when I needed them the most, and you expect me to put my faith in someone I have never seen before? I haven't fallen so low to the point that I need to beg other people for help. Even if I have a tough life, I won't ask for anything from you. You should leave now." Freya turned around and went back into the building. Brandon lowered his head in dejection. He just wanted his daughter to get her grandfather's recognition to improve her life. Even if she did not have any support from her family, at the very least, she would still have someone to depend on. However, he had forgotten that his daughter had learned to take care of herself since she was young. She wouldn't ask for help from anybody. Her heart was as tough as steel, and nobody could change her mind. Colton stayed at the Hilton Villas for dinner. While Daisy was having her dinner, she made a video call to her mother. "Mom, Colton and you are fine. You don't have to worry about us." It was afternoon on Maisie's side, so she was working at her office in Soul Jewelry. She picked up a document and asked, "I suppose nothing bad has happened lately, right?" Daisy hastily turned her phone to her brother and said, "You can ask Colton." Colton raised his head and took a deep breath as he chided his sister inwardly for throwing the question to him. "Yeah, Mom. Nothing happened." Maisie lifted her head to look at Colton. She knew Colton wouldn't lie to her, so she nodded. "All right, then." Chapter 1722. What Maisie did not know was that Colton was feeling rather guilty right now. After all, this was the first time he had lied to his mother. Just when he was about to say something, Daisy turned the phone back to herself and said, "Mom, I've made new friends in college." Colton and Nolace both have been taking great care of me, so don't worry about us. Really? Maisie chuckled. It's good that you've made new friends, but make sure you open your eyes wider this time. Daisy was stumped. Freya is a good girl. She isn't like Lisa at all. Maisie signed her name on a document and said, I'll leave that for you to judge. After all, you're grown up now. By the way, you're going to graduate soon, right? She raised her head and continued. After you've graduated, I'll give you two a graduation gift. Giggling, Daisy replied, sure. I'm not going to disturb you anymore, Mom. Bye. She ended the video call. Colton smirked and asked, why didn't you tell Mom about Ian? Believe it or not, if I told her about Ian, she and Dad would come to Yarramore tomorrow. Daisy put her phone down. He has already gotten his own punishment. I didn't have to add insult to injury anymore, right? Ian had gotten what he deserved. She did not have to care so much about this matter anymore. After all, the past was already in the past. Colton did not say anything. Daisy thought of something and hurriedly cleaned up her dish. Oh yeah, I nearly forgot. I'm going to watch an opera performance tomorrow with Freya. I have to rest early. Meanwhile, at the royal family's banquet, the Rose Palace Banquet Hall was a magnificent place. The tableware for the food was gold-plated, and the wine was provided by Chateau Latour at high prices. Other than the nobles, there were also politicians from allied countries and representatives of the royal family that came to the banquet. All of those who were present in the hall were noble, and there were many big names. Nolace attended the banquet with his mother. Diana was wearing a green velvet dress with emerald earrings and a pearl necklace. She was elegant and beautiful, and she resembled Queen Denise, her mother, a lot. Standing beside her was her son. Needless to say, he looked extraordinarily dashing in his dark blue bespoke suit, and the sapphire cornflower brooch at his collar further accentuated his great appearance. As someone who descended from two different races, he was handsome. His eyes were light-colored, and they looked like the sea. Those who gazed into his eyes would accidentally get absorbed into them. If a flower could be used to describe a man, he was like a black tulip, elegant, mysterious, and regal. The silver-haired old man standing in the crowd was wearing a suit. He had a regal air about him, and he was talking to the people while clinking glass with them. Father. Diana and Nolace walked toward the old man. The old man turned his head and stretched his arms to hug Diana. After that, he looked at Nolace and patted his shoulder. It has been 2 years since I last saw you. It seems like you have grown even taller. Nolace smiled. I'm an adult, and I think I can grow a little bit taller. The old man picked up a glass and let out a hearty laugh. You're at the age where you can have a drink. Come, have a drink with me. He took a glass of wine from the bartender and clinked it with the old man. There were also some media outlets present at the banquet hall. As the youngest grandson of King William, it went without saying that Nolace was in the spotlight. After he finished the wine, King William called a brown-haired girl to his side. Nolace, this girl is the daughter of a millionaire in Haniston. Her ancestors are descended from royalty. She is of similar status and age to you. The girl had a delicate face. There was a beauty mark at the corner of her eyes, and it further accentuated her attractiveness. Nolace's face sank a little after listening to King William's introduction. As for Diana, she seemed to have expected something like this. Chapter 1723. The girl was sizing Nolace up. After a short while, she extended her arm to Nolace and offered him a sweet smile. Hi, my name is Zenobia Livingston. Nolace grasped her hand due to courtesy and replied indifferently, nice to meet you. He quickly drew back his hand. The only reason he was responding to her was only because of basic etiquette. Zenobia could feel the residual warmth in the palm of her hand. She looked at the handsome young man who was about her own age in front of her, and a feeling that she had never experienced before surged inside of her. Ever since he came into the banquet hall until he stood in front of her, Zenobia realized that he was the Prince Charming that she had been waiting for the whole time. Knowles left the banquet hall midway through the banquet. Zenobia went around looking for him, and she finally found him on a balcony outside the corridor. He was leaning against the armrest, looking down at the large fountain in the garden downstairs. He seemed to be thinking about something. Zenobia walked toward him and greeted him. "Mr. Knowles." Knowles retracted his gaze and turned around to look at her. He replied faintly, "How can I help you?" Zenobia stopped in front of him and chuckled. "I saw you standing here alone, so I came over. What's on your mind?" Knowles did not reply. Zenobia was not angered. Instead, she teased him. "That is so sad. Don't you think you should give some reaction when a pretty girl talks to you?" Knowles squinted, and his face was expressionless. "It seems to me that you have a lot of confidence in yourself." Zenobia was stunned for a few seconds. However, she soon came around to her senses and collected her hair behind her back. "Of course. I'm pretty confident in myself. Besides, it's essential for women to be confident, don't you think?" She had a lot of suitors back in Hanniston, but those men were only interested in her looks, body, and family background. She had seen the true nature of many men. She initially thought that she would have to follow the arrangement of her family and get married to a man who matched her status. When she agreed to come to Yarramore to attend the banquet with her father, she never thought she would come across a man she was attracted to. His status matched hers. His appearance and temperament were both outstanding, and he was her type. "His Majesty William asked me to make friends with you. You're familiar with Yarramore, right? Do you mind showing me around tomorrow?" she said, seemingly very confident that he would accept her warm invitation. Looking at his phone, Knowles replied nonchalantly, "I'm sorry, but I'm occupied tomorrow." Her smile froze, and she was stunned slightly. However, she soon regained her composure and offered him a polite smile. "You're busy?" "Yeah," he replied. He had been looking at the screen of his phone, and it seemed like he was messaging someone. There was no way Zenobia would give up on him, so she pressed on. "If you're busy tomorrow, then what about the day after tomorrow?" He lifted his eyelids and looked at her coldly. "What do you think?" However, she failed to read between the lines and said, "I think it's okay. If not, I can ask you out again when you have time." His gaze was deep as he asked, "Are all women in Hanniston the same as you? It seems to me that you like to make the first move." Zenobia took a step closer to him and raised her eyebrows. "In my country, we believe that we need to go for it if we see something that we want." She inadvertently glanced at the screen of his phone, but he put his phone back into his pocket before she could see it clearly. However, her intuition as a woman told her that the screensaver on his phone was a woman. "Do you have a celebrity that you like too, Mr. Knowles?" "Not interested." She chuckled lightly. "But the screensaver on your phone seems like a picture of a female celebrity to me." Knowles frowned slightly and replied without any hesitation, "She's my fiancée." You have a fiancé?" Zenobia was stunned. "But King William told me that he's still single? You can have my grandfather get someone to show you around. It isn't appropriate for me to take you, and I'm sure that my fiancé won't like it." After he finished speaking, he walked past him and left the balcony. Chapter 1724. Zenobia bit her lips. Does he really have a fiancé, or is he lying to me? It was the weekend the next day. Daisy and Freya wanted to watch an opera performance. Initially, they thought there were only two of them, but then one more person joined them at the end. Inside the car, Daisy looked at Colton in confusion. "Colton, since when you're interested in an opera performance?" Sitting with his arms across his chest, Colton replied. "I'm not interested. I'm just worried about you." She chuckled. "Worried about me? Why do you have to worry about me when I have bodyguards going there with me?" He turned his head around to look at her and said, "They aren't reliable." The bodyguard driving the car was stumped. He couldn't say anything back to Colton, so he chided him inwardly. Since when we've become unreliable? Daisy got out of the car first when they arrived at the theater. She looked around and saw Freya waiting for her in front of the entrance. She had put on casual attire, a short-sleeved sweater with wide leg pants and a cap. "Freya!" Daisy shouted as she ran toward her. Freya turned her head around, and she frowned slightly when she saw Colton behind her. Daisy stopped in front of her. She thought of something and said, "My brother is worried about me coming here alone, so he came with me. You don't mind it, right? But I have only 2 tickets. It's okay. He'll figure it out himself. Let's go in first." Daisy wrapped her arms around hers, and both of them entered the theater. There were a lot of people in the theater. The opera today was Pirates of the Caribbean, and the performers were very professional national-level figures. Their seats were in the 6th row. After both of them sat down, Colton came over. They did not know how he got the ticket for the seat next to them. The opera performance took at least 2 hours, from the beginning to the end. The good thing was that it was exciting and thrilling enough. Daisy touched her stomach when 3 of them came out of the theater. "Do you guys want to grab something to eat?" "I'm fine with it," said Freya. Daisy looked toward Colton. Sticking his hands into his pockets, Colton replied, "You book the restaurant." Daisy booked a restaurant that offered some unique and exotic food. When they arrived at the restaurant, Daisy called the waiter to order their meal. Meanwhile, a group of people came out of a private room. Amongst the group of people, there was Lisa. Lisa was walking beside a middle-aged man. She was wearing a student uniform. She did not have long black hair, and she was forced to change her hair to this childish-looking girl's hairstyle. When she heard the familiar voice, she looked toward the hall, and just as she expected, she saw Daisy and her brother. She lowered her head and bit her lower lip. She had been turned into a tool to make money after she was sold to Daniel. Her customer, Mr. Livingston, was a pervert as well. He had a fetish for young virgins and an obsession for uniforms. She had suffered a lot because of his obsession. Not only was she forced to put on something she did not like, but she could only wear the student uniform that he bought for her. She was even forbidden from wearing makeup and perfume as he said he liked the purity of a young girl. Mr. Livingston was a successful businessman who had a strong family background in Hanniston. He had told everyone that he had come to Yarramore for some time because of some business affair, but in reality, he was here to satisfy his desires. After all, he couldn't unleash himself in his country due to his status and identity. On top of that, his wife also came from a big family. However, things were different in another country. He did not have to worry about his family or getting caught by the reporters. Even now, Lisa still felt that Daisy and Nolace were the ones who were responsible for what she was going through. Soon, the waiter served their food. Their food was exquisitely presented, and all of them were the specialties of another country. Among the dishes Freya had ordered, there were cherries. Daisy picked up her knife and fork. "How did you know that I like to eat cherries?" Chapter 1725. Freya was stunned and hastily said, "Wait, that isn't." Unfortunately, she was too late. Daisy had already put the cherry in her mouth. In the next second, her face contorted out of shape, and she began to regret putting the cherry in her mouth. She got up from her seat and rushed toward the restroom. Freya only came around to her senses after a long while. She turned her head to look at Colton and asked, "What's wrong with her?" She just took a bite of the foie gras. Why did she behave like she had eaten something worse? Colton was cutting through his steak as he said, "She doesn't like offal. When we went out to try Western cuisine with our parents, all of the cherries were real cherries. That was why Daisy couldn't differentiate the foie gras from the real cherries." Freya lowered her head. "I didn't know that she doesn't like foie gras." After all, judging from Daisy's status, she thought she would be very familiar with Western food and should be able to accept it. However, it now seemed to her that she was wrong. Every person had a different taste. For those who did not like foie gras, it went without saying that they wouldn't appreciate the taste of the foie gras melting in their mouths. Not everyone could eat offal, just like she couldn't accept the cuisine from Harriston. Colton glanced at her and said, I'm sure she'll be able to differentiate it next time after what happened today. Daisy still felt a little bit disgusted in the restroom after eating the foie gras. She couldn't understand why there would be someone who enjoyed eating food like that. She came out of the restroom, and a figure appeared behind her and pushed her on her way down the stairs. Daisy couldn't keep her balance and fell. Lisa stood at the stairway with an evil smile on her face. What are you doing? Shouted a waiter. The smile disappeared from Lisa's face. She hastily covered her face and escaped through the fire exit. The waiter went up to Daisy and helped her to her feet. Are you all right, miss? When Daisy fell down the stairs, she protected her head instinctively. Her knees and elbows struck the floor and were bleeding. Lisa seemed a little bit flustered when she came to the parking lot. She did not expect to be seen by that waiter when she pushed Daisy down the stairs. However, she soon calmed down and heaved a sigh of relief. After all, the waiter did not know who she was. Besides, Daisy just suffered some minor injuries. She did not do anything wrong. She was the one who had put her in her current situation. Pushing her down the stairs was not enough to alleviate her anger at all. She must make Daisy suffer like she did. The waiter went to inform Colton and Freya about Daisy. Both of them hurriedly headed to the restaurant staff room when they heard the news. Daisy was sitting on the chair, and the wounds on her knees and elbows had been treated. Colton stopped the waiter and asked with a grim expression on his face, what happened? The waiter replied, I saw a girl pushing her down the stairs. I didn't know who that girl was since she had already escaped by the time I got there. Colton's face sank as he continued. Can I see the surveillance footage? The waiter nodded. Yeah, you can. Their patron was injured in their restaurant. If things got too big, it would affect their reputation as well. Colton looked at Freya and said, you stay here with her. Freya nodded. After that, he followed the waiter to the monitoring room. Freya sat beside Daisy and asked, do you know who pushed you? No. I don't know. Daisy shook her head. By the time I came around to my senses, I was already on the floor. Lisa had pushed her from the back, so she couldn't see her face. Freya rested her chin on her hand and fell in deep thought. No one would push her down the stairs for no reason unless the person knew Daisy and held a grudge against her. She thought of someone and looked at Daisy. Do you think it's Lisa? Other than Lisa, Freya couldn't think of anyone who would hate Daisy so much. Daisy was stunned and fell silent. Chapter 1726. On the other corner of the premises, the waiter pulled out the surveillance footage, and they saw Daisy coming out of the restroom. In the next instant, a lady suddenly came out of the corner of the monitor and pushed Daisy. That girl's back faced the surveillance camera throughout the process, so they could not see her face. Seeing this scene, Colton was terrifyingly calm. Although the other party had deliberately avoided the cameras, he could already guess who it was. Knowles, who learned that Daisy had been injured, immediately put aside the work at hand, handed it over to his secretary, got up, and walked out of the office. In the corridor, he happened to run into Zenobia, who had just walked out of the elevator, and the person next to her was King William's assistant, Paul. Knowles stopped, and his expression dimmed instantly. Paul walked forward, gave off a smile, and nodded. Mr. Knowles, His Majesty has asked me to bring Miss Livingston here. He hopes that you and Miss Livingston can get along well. Knowles' facial outline turned slightly cold, and his indifferent eyes swept across Zenovia's face within a matter of seconds. Zenobia raised her eyebrows and pretended not to read his expression. She had King William's support behind her, not to mention that she had always been a competitive person, and she would never allow her to act cowardly and give in. Paul looked at Zenobia. Miss Livingston, I hope you'll have a great time with Mr. Knowles. Zenobia smiled and thanked him. Thank you. After Paul left, Zenobia leaned forward in front of Knowles with a playful expression. I know you'll definitely not come to me, but it doesn't matter. I can always come to you. Nolace looked at her expressionlessly and said meaningfully, "You don't seem to have taken my words seriously." He had made it very clear that night. Zenobia knew exactly what he meant. She rubbed the manicure that she just got done and smirked. "I know you have a fiancé, but you haven't announced it publicly yet, have you?" Nolace frowned. Zenobia lifted her gaze to look at him. "King William doesn't even know that you have a fiancé. It means that you and she are only in a relationship. So as long as you're still not married, don't I still have a chance to fight for you?" Nolace scoffed, and his eyes looked disdainful. "Are you saying that you want to fight with her? Is there any rule that claims that I can't do so?" Zenobia hooked her finger on the collar of his suit. "With my identity and status, if we get married, my parents will unconditionally support the Knowles and your company. I can bring you all the benefits that you can imagine." She took another step toward him, closing the distance between the both of them for another half an inch, and stared into those eyes that had always captivated her. "You and your little girlfriend haven't made your relationship public. Presumably, her identity doesn't make a good match with yours. I totally understand. Cinderella's story is something that exists only in fairy tales." She sounded extremely presumptuous due to her confidence in her identity and power. A Cinderella who doesn't have a family background. Even if she's become his girlfriend, she'll still have to bow her head in the face of power and status. "I won't even need to do anything. She'll be sensible enough to give up and walk away obediently." Nolace grabbed her hand. Zenobia was stunned for a moment, and her heartbeat elevated. But the next second, Nolace did not even hesitate before flinging her out of his way. Zenobia was wearing high heels, so she lost balance and fell to the ground. She was shocked and raised her head. "Did you just push me?" Nolace took a handkerchief out of his pocket, wiped the hand that he used to grab her, and then threw it into the trash can beside her. "Miss Livingston, have you ever thought that you might have overestimated yourself?" Zenobia had never suffered such grievances since she was a kid, let alone in front of a man. The men she had been surrounded with feared her and flattered her. Who would have the guts to treat her so ruthlessly? She stood up and said in amusement, "Are you saying that I'm overestimating myself? I don't care about the power that you Livingstons possess, other than that." Nolace paused for a second and then glanced at her sternly. "Save yourself some time and energy and give up fighting. I don't like you, so stop acting all smart and witty." Chapter 1727. The last sentence sounded like a warning. Nolace then ignored her and left. Zenobia bit her lip, turned to look at Nolace, and stomped her feet furiously. "You'll regret it." Nolace rushed to the Hilton Villas, and he asked the housekeeper immediately when she came to open the door, "Where's Daisy?" Before the housekeeper could answer him, Colton walked downstairs. "Knowles, is this how you solve an issue?" Nolace frowned. "What do you mean?" Colton stopped in front of him. "Didn't you say that you've already resolved Lisa's issue? Why would she still have the guts to appear before Daisy? I shouldn't have put too much faith in this shitsack and let that heinous woman go." Nolace remained silent, his masseter muscles twitched, and his gaze turned slightly cold. Was it Lisa? Who else could it be other than her? Colton grabbed the front of his shirt. "If anything were to happen to Daisy, Lisa aside, I wouldn't let you off this matter." The housekeeper looked at them and did not dare to utter a single word. The atmosphere between the two was so tense that it seemed to be on the brink of lighting on fire. Nolace took a deep breath. "I'll get to the bottom of this matter and get back to you. You'd better do so for your own sake." Colton let go of him, did not stop by for another second, slammed the door, and left the villa. Nolace went upstairs and pushed open the bedroom door. Daisy lifted her head and subconsciously pulled down her skirt to cover the wound. "Why did you come here all of a sudden?" He stopped by the bed, sat down, pulled up her skirt slightly, took a good look at the wound on her fair knee, and frowned. Daisy looked at him. "It's just a tiny flesh wound. It'll be fine in a few days." Nolace retracted his gaze and shifted it onto her face. Does it hurt? She turned her face away and snorted faintly. You can try it out yourself to see if it hurts. He stroked her cheek with his palm, leaned forward, and kissed her forehead. Sorry. Daisy was startled as she could see that he was blaming himself through his gaze. You're not the one who hurt me, so why are you apologizing? I'm the one who caused this incident indirectly. Knowles embraced her in his arms and rested his chin on top of her head. Daisy, I won't give her another chance to do anything to you. Daisy looked up at him and sounded a little surprised. Are you talking about Lisa? He responded with a hum, and his eyes turned gloomy and murderous when she was not paying attention. My original intention when I chose to leave her in the black market was to torture her and make her feel remorse. It seems that her life in the black market is still too comfortable for her. Daisy closed her eyes, and thoughts flashed across her mind. After a moment of silence, Daisy suddenly got a sniff of fragrance from his suit. Why do you smell of perfume? Nala's eyes narrowed slightly. It seems that Zenobia deliberately sprayed some of her perfume on me when she approached me just now. He hugged Daisy and chuckled softly. Your nose is really sensitive, huh? Are you calling me a dog? I didn't say that. Knowles kissed her on the cheek. Daisy pushed him away. You haven't even answered me, and you're already taking advantage of me. He gave off a wry smile and then concealed his expression almost immediately. When I was on my way here, a lady who didn't know her position rammed into me. The scent that you're getting might have come from that incident. She wondered. Do you know her? He paused for a few seconds. No. Seeing that Daisy was still doubting him, Knowles immediately took off his jacket and laughed. I'll throw this jacket away when I get home so that you won't get jealous. Daisy crossed her arms and turned her face away. If I were to get jealous over such puny things so easily all day long, I might not live a very long life. Knowles sneered and rubbed the top of her hair. You might still live a long life, but I don't think that will be the case for me. She choked and raised her hand to hit him. Knowles grabbed her hand and approached her. You're injured. Don't you feel pain when you're moving around to hit me? Chapter 1728. Daisy said angrily, you deserve it. Nala's smile intensified. Then you can teach me a lesson when your wound has recovered. The lesson teaching had an implicit meaning, but Daisy understood it, and her ears flushed instantly. You shameless piece of crap. You clearly know that I can never overwhelm you in a fight. I want to get some rest already. She pulled the blanket up, lay down, and buried herself under the blanket. Knowles lifted the blanket and waited for her to reveal half a head. If you were to die of suffocation, I would no longer have a wife. Bah. With so many women in the world, isn't it a piece of cake for you to find yourself another wife? Knowles looked straight at her. But I only want you. She quickly looked away as her face was really warm. I'm also not his match when it comes to the level of shamelessness. Near the city's outskirts, at the Sunrise Hotel that offered its customers manor-style accommodation. Outside the suite, Zenobia rang the doorbell, and after a while, a middle-aged man with a decent appearance and a solemn suit opened the door. Looking at Zenobia, who was standing outside the door, he was astonished for a split second and avoided having direct eye contact with her. In the future, give me a call in advance whenever you want to come over. Zenobia ignored him, walked past him and into the room, and placed the bag on the couch. Dad, I've decided that I want to stay in Yarramore. Juno was flustered for a bit. He closed the door, looked back at his daughter, who was sitting on the couch pouring tea, and frowned. Didn't you say you wanted to go back home the last time we met? When his daughter wanted to come to Yarramore with him, he thought it was inconvenient for him to carry out some activities. However, he thought that she would want to go back as long as she had had enough fun here. I don't want to go back now. Zenobia put the teacup down and chuckled. I found the man I want to marry. What? Juno was stunned, then walked up to the couch across Zenobia. Zenobia, who's the man that you want to marry? And what's his identity? He's King William's grandson, the young master of the Knolls. When Lisa, who was hiding in the room, heard this, she was taken aback. Mr. Livingston's daughter has taken a fancy to Knowles? Numerous thoughts ran across Juno's mind. Dad. She stood up, walked up to her father, sat down, and wrapped her arm around his. I've fallen in love with him at first sight. I want him to be mine. You must help me. Juno squinted. It'll surely be beneficial if Zenobia can get married to King William's grandson. He smiled. You're my daughter, so of course, I'll help you. Lisa looked outside and sneered. This pervert is nothing but a sanctimonious hypocrite. He might look like a good father and husband on the surface, but it seems that his daughter still doesn't know that he has such a hobby. And now, let's just say I have something on this pervert. At the end of the city, Knowles left the Hilton Villas and went straight to the underground black market. The basement of the black market ran various clubs, strip clubs, massage and bathing parlors, and casinos. The most famous club among all the mentioned facilities was the Queen of the Nights. Edison walked to the front of the car. Knowles lowered the car window slowly, and Edison reported, Mr. Knowles, the guests Lisa provided service to are of unusual identities, and they said they can't disclose it according to the rules of the club. The Queen of the Nights was a club managed by Donald himself, and most of the clients they served had special identities. The club had secret passageways, which were strictly confidential. Guests with special identities were generally reluctant to disclose their personal information, and the staff would encrypt the customer's information. Even if the police were to come here for investigations, they would not be able to find them. This was why the Queen of the Nights, which was extremely obscure to the upper-class circles, was very popular among them. Knowles' expression dimmed, looking cold and sullen. It seems that she's trying to please that distinguished guest and find a way out for herself. I might have underestimated Lisa's determination to survive. Edison asked, what should we do now? If the guest behind her, chapter 1729. So what if she's found herself a backer? Knowles' gaze looked cold and indifferent. The first condition that someone in her industry must have in order for her to be able to serve high-end customers is chastity. She obviously has a body that has undergone quite a series of history, and if she wants to pretend to be a first-timer, there's only one way for her to do so. Edison frowned. But she's making Donald profits. If we were to make a move on her, Donald will definitely not stand by and watch. In Donald's eyes, the only thing that he cares about is his interests. So who can guarantee he won't side with Lisa to protect his interests? Knowles scoffed. Lisa isn't the only person who can bring Donald benefits. In the Queen of the Nights, since when will it end well when a woman runs out of value? A few days later, Daisy returned to the college and overheard her classmates talking about Knowles' engagement. Daisy stopped outside the rehearsal room, and her gaze landed on the people who were gathering in a circle, discussing Knowles. Isn't Knowles dating Daisy? Who knows? It's said that King William wants him to marry the daughter of one of the consortiums of Haniston. So even if Daisy is the daughter of the Goldmans, she'll still have to obtain His Majesty's approval. When someone saw Daisy, they subconsciously nudged the person who was speaking, and everyone looked at her and scattered awkwardly. Daisy pursed her lips and walked toward them all of a sudden. Where did the news come from? Didn't you watch the news? Yes, it's in the news that came up on television this morning. I'm guessing that many people should have seen it. Daisy took her cell phone out to check the news on the internet. Sure enough, there was a video. She patiently finished the whole interview and kept her cell phone away. And as if nothing had happened, she calmly changed into her dancewear. Her classmates were also surprised. How can she not be furious when she sees that her boyfriend is about to get engaged to another woman? When Freya came to the rehearsal room to find Daisy, the rehearsal had already ended, and Daisy was the only person who stayed back to practice repeatedly on the empty stage. Freya got to the edge of the stage. Daisy. Daisy stopped, turned to look at her, and smiled. What's up? Isn't the rehearsal over? Why are you still practicing alone? Freya asked her tentatively. She was not sure whether Daisy had seen the news. Because I'm hardworking. She still had a wide smile on her face as if she was emotionless. Freya could not help but think of something. Daisy got down from the stage and picked up her backpack on the chair. I'm hungry. Let's go eat. She then walked past Freya. Freya turned to look at her, feeling that Daisy was acting a little too calm, unusually calm. Downtown. Zenobia was sitting in the restaurant booth and was in a good mood. I unilaterally disclosed to the media that I'm going to get engaged to Nolace. His little girlfriend should have seen it, right? I'm confident that I'll be able to use this news to get the girl out of my way. And while I'm at it, I can officially tie myself to Nolace through this news. As long as he dares to announce his relationship with that girl will only become the homewrecker who intervenes in our relationship. I get anything that I want. Nolace is no exception. At that time, a figure appeared in the restaurant. Every move it made looked slick and decisive. Zenobia looked at Nolace, who was approaching, and the corners of her lips slightly twitched. Before Nolace sat down, she picked up her coffee and gave off a faint smirk. You must have come to me after seeing the news. The whole world now knows that I want to marry you, so why not make it a reality together? Nolace stopped in front of the table with a stern gaze. It seems that words don't work on you, or do you think that I won't dare to do anything to you only because my grandfather is supporting your... Chapter 1730. Zenobia put the coffee down. It's only a matter of time before we get engaged. Are you angry only because I've made it public without your permission? There was not even a trace of turbulence in Nala's eyes. Who told you that I'll agree to that? His Majesty has high hopes about our marriage. Zenobia got up and approached Nolace. I'm confident that you'll fall in love with me in no time after getting together with me. He let off a scoff all of a sudden, but his expression looked sullen. You've crossed a line with your wittiness. Zenovia's eyes were filled with a hint of presumptuous hilarity as she approached him. I don't care about your indifference. After all, like you, and I'll definitely be able to please you more than that Cinderella girlfriend of yours. Oh really? Nolace was expressionless, and his gaze turned even colder. Do you know what I'll do to someone like you? Zenobia chuckled. No matter what you do to me, they'll all be exceptionally charming to me. Nolace slapped her abruptly. Zenobia, who had never been beaten before in her life, could not take his full strength and fell onto the table. She was stunned and stared at him in astonishment. Nolace grabbed her by her jaw, forced her to face himself, and said with a gloomy expression, the last woman who dared to do this to my girlfriend was thrown to the black market by me. She got abused and ravaged during her so far short stay there. Do you want a taste of that? Zenobia pushed him away and growled, Are you mad? You. How dare you hit me? Nolace slapped her again, and her body turned to the other side, trembling slightly. She had always thought that Nolace was a gentleman, and no matter how unreasonable her actions were, as long as his grandfather was on her side, he would never dare to do anything to her. But he actually hit her. I won't pull punches whenever anyone dares to cross my line, and that includes my grandfather. If you still don't take this as a lesson and continue to do as you please, I can't guarantee what I'll do to you next. Nolace left without looking back. Zenobia sat on the chair, covering her aching cheeks, and her eyes were bloodshot. At that moment, a woman with a mask stopped in front of her. Miss Livingston, do you want to know why Nolace would do this to you? Zenobia raised her head with a hostile expression. Who the hell are you? Lisa took her phone out and showed her a photo of Daisy. She's Daisy Vanderbilt, the girlfriend that Nolace is protecting. In the college's canteen. Daisy had been eating with her head bowed, and she had not spoken a word since ordering. Freya had noticed her abnormality long ago. Did you see the news? Daisy paused for a few seconds and replied absent-mindedly, yes. Freya felt helpless. Nolace didn't admit to the engagement. That woman actually put the whole thing together by herself. Why don't you ask Nolace in person if you're worried? Throughout the video, the woman was the only person who appeared and claimed unilaterally that she's engaged to Nolace. But did Nolace agree to that statement? It's so obvious that's something that she cooked up unilaterally. Daisy raised her head. But still, he didn't do anything to clarify it. Thinking of this, she felt very gloomy and depressed. How do you know that he won't clarify it? Maybe he doesn't even have the time to watch the news himself. Freya propped her hand against the side of her forehead and laughed. Don't you know deep down just how much Nolace likes you? Lisa actually took off her clothes in front of him but still failed to seduce him. Do you think that this woman would have the ability to snatch him from you? Daisy pouted. She knew that Nolace liked her very much, but when she saw the news, she could not help but feel upset whenever she thought that he would be engaged to another woman. Freya fetched her some vegetables. Okay, eat with peace of mind first. Nolace is all yours, he won't run away.